When a foreign leader lands at an airport, someone is there to greet them, not because it's polite, though it is, but because it's a carefully calibrated signal of power, respect, and alliance strength. The rank of the greeter, the formality of the ceremony, the location of subsequent meetings, none of these are accidents. They're all part of a diplomatic language that has evolved over centuries to communicate relationships without words. When no one shows up, that's also a signal. And what happened at Mar-a-Lago wasn't chaos. It was a deliberate dismantling of the diplomatic architecture that has structured international relations for centuries. To understand what this means, we need to understand why diplomatic protocol exists in the first place, what it communicates, and what happens when it collapses. Diplomatic protocol emerged from necessity. When sovereigns and their representatives met, the risk of misunderstanding or offense was enormous. Wars started over perceived slights. Alliances collapsed over protocol disputes. So gradually, over centuries, a common language developed, a set of rituals and procedures that allowed different cultures and political systems to interact with reduced risk of catastrophic miscommunication. The Congress of Vienna in 1814 toward 1815 codified much of modern diplomatic protocol. After the Napoleonic Wars devastated Europe, diplomats gathered to rebuild the international order. They realized that preventing future conflicts required not just treaties, but also shared rules for how nations would interact. Protocol became one of those rules. The Congress itself nearly collapsed multiple times over protocol disputes. Who would enter rooms first? Whose signature would appear first on documents? Which ambassadors had precedence? These seem trivial, but they represented fundamental questions about national status and power hierarchy. The diplomats at Vienna understood that getting protocol wrong could reignite conflicts that had just cost millions of lives. So they created elaborate systems. Ambassadors were ranked by their credentials' date of presentation. Earlier dates gave precedence regardless of national power. This removed arbitrary decisions and prevented constant renegotiation of status. Seating at conferences was arranged alphabetically by French-language country names, removing power-based hierarchies. These rules worked precisely because they were consistent, predictable, and applied equally. Who sits where at a state dinner? Who speaks first at a summit? How are ambassadors received? These weren't trivial questions. They determined status, signaled intentions, and established hierarchies. Get them wrong, and you could insult a potential ally or embolden an adversary. Get them right, and you could build relationships that prevented wars. The protocols that emerged weren't arbitrary. They reflected deep psychological and political realities about how humans and nations interact. Respect must be demonstrated, not just declared. Trust requires vulnerability, which protocol rituals create through mutual adherence to shared rules. Power dynamics must be acknowledged, but also managed to prevent humiliation that breeds resentment. Airport greetings are a perfect example. When a foreign leader arrives, the rank of the greeting party signals how important that leader is to the host country. A head of state might be greeted by the host nation's head of state, the highest honor. More commonly, they're greeted by a senior cabinet official, ambassador, or protocol officer. The specific rank chosen communicates precisely how the relationship is valued. When no one shows up, the message is equally clear. You're not important enough to warrant official attention. It's not neutral. It's a deliberate slight. And everyone in the diplomatic community understands this. It's part of the shared language. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky landed in Florida to meet with Donald Trump. Ukraine is under invasion by Russia, has lost tens of thousands of soldiers defending its territory, depends heavily on American military aid, and faces an existential threat to its survival as an independent nation. Zelensky is risking his life to travel internationally for diplomatic meetings that might secure his country's future. He was greeted by Ukraine's own ambassador to the United States. No American official met him, not a cabinet secretary, not a junior State Department officer, not even a protocol functionary. The message was unmistakable. The United States does not consider Ukraine's president important enough to send anyone to the airport. Compare this to Vladimir Putin's arrival in Alaska for meetings with Trump. American military personnel literally rolled out a red carpet. They knelt to unroll it. The symbolism was captured in photographs that stunned diplomatic observers. American service members on their knees before Russia's president, while Russia's foreign minister wore a USSR t-shirt, as if to emphasize Russia's dominance. The Alaska reception was unprecedented in modern American diplomatic practice. Presidents rarely travel to greet foreign leaders at airports within the United States. That's what protocol officers and cabinet secretaries are for. But Trump made an exception for Putin. The red carpet ceremony itself was elaborate, with military honor guards and formal protocol that typically accompanies only the most important state visits. The optics were catastrophic from an alliance perspective. Here was America's primary adversary receiving honors that close allies don't typically get. The photographs of American military personnel kneeling spread across European and Asian media, used by critics to argue that American leadership had become subordinate to Russian power. Russian state media played the images repeatedly, interpreting them as evidence of American weakness and Russian strength. The contrast is not subtle. Putin, the leader invading Ukraine, receives ceremonial honors with American military personnel on their knees. Zelensky, the leader defending against that invasion, receives nothing, not even a mid-level State Department functionary. This isn't protocol failure. This is protocol being weaponized to communicate hierarchy. Putin is honored, Zelensky is diminished, and everyone watching understands the message. Then there's the meeting location itself. In normal diplomatic practice, meetings with foreign leaders occur in official settings. The White House Oval Office for the most important meetings. The State Department for working-level discussions. These locations matter because they represent institutional authority and national sovereignty. Mar-a-Lago is not an official government facility. It's a private club owned by Donald Trump personally. Members pay fees to belong. Guests stay in hotel rooms. There's a dining room, a ballroom, and golf courses. It's essentially a resort that happens to host diplomatic meetings when Trump chooses to conduct government business there. Holding the Zelensky meeting at Mar-a-Lago rather than the White House sends multiple messages. First, this isn't important enough for the formal machinery of government. Second, this is Trump's personal prerogative, not official U.S. policy. Third, the setting reinforces that Ukraine is supplicant seeking favor, not an ally with standing. The specific room chosen makes it worse. Not the ballroom, not a private office, but the dining room. Trump literally held a diplomatic meeting to discuss war and peace in a room designed for eating meals. He treated Zelensky's visit like a lunch appointment, not a summit between allies facing an existential crisis. During the meeting itself, Trump kicked the press out. But the manner matters. He didn't have staff escort them out professionally. He personally told them to leave, making jokes about whether offering them food would constitute a bribe that would obligate positive coverage. This turned what should be a serious diplomatic event into a performance emphasizing Trump's personal control. Think about what Zelensky experienced. His country is being invaded. His soldiers are dying. His cities are being bombed. He needs American support to survive. And he's sitting in a dining room at a private club being told to get some food while the American president jokes with reporters about bribes. The power dynamic couldn't be clearer. Trump holds all the cards. Zelensky needs what only Trump can provide. And Trump is making certain Zelensky feels that imbalance. This isn't diplomacy between equals. It's supplication to a sovereign who may or may not grant requests depending on his mood. The press conference that followed demonstrated the same dynamic. Trump repeatedly interrupted Zelensky, answered questions directed to Zelensky, and used the occasion to air his own grievances about NATO, about European allies, about his domestic critics. Zelensky stood there maintaining composure, forced to listen to Trump ramble about topics unrelated to Ukraine's survival. At one point, Trump said Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed, and that Putin has been very generous in his feelings toward Ukraine. Zelensky's face, captured in video, showed the strain of maintaining diplomatic composure while hearing absurdities. He gave a slight smirk, a barely perceptible acknowledgement of how ridiculous the statement was. But he couldn't contradict Trump openly. He needed American aid too much. This is what protocol collapse looks like. In a functional diplomatic relationship, the host ensures the visiting leader can speak freely, maintains their dignity, and treats them as a respected partner. Trump did the opposite, dominating the conversation, making Zelensky stand beside him while Trump praised Putin, forcing Ukraine's president into a subordinate role. The historical context makes this even more striking. The United States has traditionally been the guarantor of international order. After World War II, American power underwrote a system of alliances, trade relationships, and diplomatic norms that prevented major power wars for 75 years. That system depended on allies trusting that America would treat them with respect and stand by commitments. Every ally watching the Zelensky-Trump interaction draws conclusions. If Ukraine, actively defending itself against invasion by America's primary adversary, can be treated this dismissively, what does that mean for other allies? Japan, watching China's military buildup, wonders if America would treat them better. South Korea, facing North Korean threats, questions American reliability. European NATO members see Zelensky's humiliation and recalculate their dependence on American security guarantees. This is how alliances collapse, not through formal treaty withdrawals, but through accumulated demonstrations that the alliance leader doesn't value the relationship enough to maintain basic diplomatic respect. When respect erodes, trust follows. When trust erodes, allies make alternative arrangements. The Mar-a-Lago meeting wasn't just about Trump and Zelensky. It was about signaling to every American ally that they cannot count on being treated as partners. Now contrast this with how Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Zelensky around the same time. Carney received Zelensky in Ottawa with full diplomatic honors. The meeting occurred in official government buildings. The press conference treated Zelensky as an equal partner. Carney announced $22.5 billion in economic assistance and spoke about Ukraine's right to defend itself and the importance of standing against Russian aggression. The contrast is intentional. Canada is demonstrating what alliance partnership looks like: formal respect, public support, substantial material assistance. The United States under Trump is demonstrating the opposite: casual disrespect, ambiguous support, meetings held in dining rooms. Allies notice these contrasts and adjust their strategies accordingly. But protocol collapse isn't just about insult, it's about power signaling. Every protocol violation communicates something about who has power and who doesn't. Trump's treatment of Zelensky says, "I have the power to treat you however I want because you need me more than I need you." This is probably accurate in narrow transactional terms. Ukraine does need American military aid desperately. Trump does hold leverage over whether that aid continues. In a purely power-based analysis, Trump can treat Zelensky disrespectfully because Zelensky has no good alternatives. But this misunderstands how power actually works in international relations over time horizons longer than a single transaction. Power isn't just about immediate leverage in a single negotiation. It's about reputation, credibility, and the willingness of others to work with you in future transactions across multiple domains. When Trump humiliates Zelensky publicly, he demonstrates to every future negotiating partner that the United States cannot be trusted to maintain basic diplomatic respect, even with allies in desperate circumstances. This has immediate costs. Allied intelligence services become more cautious about sharing sensitive information with Americans if they believe it might be disclosed in ways that embarrass them. Allied militaries hesitate to integrate planning with American forces if they doubt American political commitment. But the deeper costs are strategic and long-term. International relations isn't a series of isolated bilateral transactions. It's an ongoing multilateral system where reputation matters enormously. When the United States treats Ukraine dismissively, Japan notices and recalculates the value of its alliance with America. When South Korea sees Zelensky's humiliation, South Korean leaders ask whether they would be treated better in a crisis. When European NATO members watch American protocol violations, they accelerate plans for strategic autonomy. These costs compound over time. A reputation for unreliability and disrespect takes years to build and decades to repair. Trump's treatment of Zelensky at Mar-a-Lago will be cited in foreign policy debates for generations as evidence that American commitments are worthless when politically inconvenient. There's also a deeper truth about power that protocol violations reveal. True power is often demonstrated by not exercising maximum leverage in every situation. The United States was most powerful globally when it exercised restraint, treated allies with respect, and built systems that benefited multiple parties rather than extracting maximum advantage from every interaction. Trump's approach inverts this. He sees treating Zelensky disrespectfully as demonstrating power. Look how much I can humiliate someone who needs my help. But historically, this kind of behavior signals weakness, not strength. Secure powers don't need to constantly prove their dominance through petty demonstrations. Insecure powers do. The Soviet Union in its declining years behaved this way, insisting on ceremonial deference, demanding acknowledgement of its power status, unable to maintain relationships except through coercion and humiliation. This wasn't strength. It was the behavior of a declining power that knew it was declining and tried to compensate through aggressive assertion of prerogatives. When the United States behaves this way, insisting on Mar-a-Lago meetings instead of White House diplomacy, refusing to send airport greeters, treating allies like supplicants, it signals American decline, not American strength. It suggests America no longer has the power to lead through attraction and shared interests, only through coercion and transactional leverage. The anthropology of diplomatic ritual is revealing here. Anthropologists who study ritual in traditional societies find that rituals serve multiple functions. They reduce anxiety by making interactions predictable. They signal group membership and shared values. They create obligations and expectations that bind communities together. And they establish status hierarchies in ways that everyone accepts, because the rituals are followed consistently. Diplomatic protocol serves identical functions. It reduces anxiety by making international interactions predictable. Everyone knows the airport greeting protocol, the seating arrangements, the order of speakers. It signals membership in the community of nations that respect international norms. It creates obligations. If I treat your leader respectfully, I expect reciprocal respect. And it establishes hierarchies in ways that are accepted because they're ritualized rather than arbitrary. When protocol collapses, all these functions fail. International interactions become unpredictable and anxiety-inducing. The community of nations fractures as some members refuse to follow shared rules. Obligations become meaningless when respect isn't reciprocal, and hierarchies become contested because they're based on power assertion rather than accepted ritual. This is what's happening in American diplomacy. Trump doesn't follow protocol because he sees it as constraining his personal prerogatives. But in abandoning protocol, he's abandoning the shared language that made American leadership of the international system possible. Other nations don't know what to expect from American diplomacy. They can't rely on shared rules. American promises become meaningless because there's no ritualized structure reinforcing them. The Mar-a-Lago dining room meeting becomes a symbol of this broader collapse. It's not just that the meeting was disrespectful. It's that it represented the abandonment of the entire diplomatic architecture that made American global leadership functional. Consider what normal U.S.-Ukraine diplomatic engagement would look like. Zelensky would be greeted at the airport by the Secretary of State or a senior Defense Department official. He would be transported to the White House. The meeting would occur in the Oval Office or Situation Room. Official photographs would be released showing the leaders engaged in serious discussion. A joint press conference would affirm shared commitment to Ukraine's defense and territorial integrity. Zelensky would leave with clear commitments about military aid and political support. This protocol serves practical purposes. The airport greeting begins the relationship with respect and signals that the visit is important. The White House meeting location invokes the authority of the U.S. government and national institutions. The Oval Office symbolizes presidential commitment. The press conference creates public record of commitments. The clear deliverables give both leaders something concrete to take back to their constituencies. None of this happened at Mar-a-Lago. Instead, Zelensky got a dining room meeting where Trump praised Putin, no clear commitments, and a public demonstration that Ukraine's president ranks below Russia's in Trump's hierarchy of preferred partners. The protocol violation wasn't a mistake. It was the message. The long-term consequences are difficult to measure but almost certainly significant. Every foreign ministry and defense department globally is analyzing the Mar-a-Lago meeting for lessons about American reliability. Every ally is recalculating the value of American security commitments. Every adversary is noting that American treatment of allies has become arbitrary and demeaning. China is watching and drawing conclusions about how America would respond if China moves against Taiwan. If Ukraine, a country actually being invaded, gets dining room meetings and airport snubs, why would Taiwan expect better? The protocol collapse at Mar-a-Lago provides evidence for Chinese arguments that American commitments are hollow and allies cannot rely on American support. Russia is watching and drawing conclusions about alliance cohesion. Every time Trump humiliates an ally, Russia gains leverage. The allies become more desperate, more willing to make concessions, more doubtful that America will actually defend them. The protocol violations aren't just rude. They're strategically advantageous to American adversaries. European NATO members are watching and accelerating their plans for strategic autonomy, the ability to defend themselves without American assistance. This has been discussed theoretically for years. The Mar-a-Lago meeting makes it urgent. If the United States won't even maintain basic diplomatic respect with Ukraine, Europeans cannot assume American protection will be there when needed. The irony is that Trump believes he's demonstrating strength through these protocol violations. He thinks treating Zelensky dismissively shows American power. But actual strategic analysts see the opposite. A declining hegemon that has lost the ability to lead through attraction and must resort to humiliation because it has no other tools left. History provides clear examples of how hegemons decline. They don't usually lose military power first. That comes later. They lose moral authority and soft power first. They stop treating allies with respect. They become transactional and exploitative. They abandon the norms and institutions that made their leadership accepted. And then, sometimes decades later, the military power follows the moral authority into irrelevance. The British Empire didn't fall because it suddenly lost military capability. Britain in 1945 still had substantial military forces and controlled vast territories. The Royal Navy remained powerful. British military technology was sophisticated. But the moral legitimacy of British rule had evaporated. Colonial subjects no longer accepted British authority. Allies no longer saw partnership with Britain as beneficial. The transition took decades, but historians can trace its origins to Britain's treatment of colonial subjects and allies during the interwar period and World War II. British officials became increasingly high-handed, treating Indian leaders dismissively, imposing policies without consultation, breaking promises about post-war independence. These weren't just moral failures. They were strategic errors that undermined the legitimacy that made British imperial authority sustainable. When Indian independence came in 1947, it wasn't primarily because Britain lacked military power to maintain control. It was because the political will to maintain empire had collapsed both in Britain and in the colonies. The moral authority that legitimized British rule was gone. And once that legitimacy vanished, the formal structures of empire couldn't be sustained regardless of military capability. The United States isn't Britain in 1945. American military power remains substantially greater, and the international system operates differently than colonial empires did. But the pattern of legitimacy preceding formal power decline is visible. The Mar-a-Lago Protocol collapse is one data point in a larger pattern of American diplomatic degradation that erodes the moral authority and soft power that made American global leadership accepted rather than merely imposed. Whether this can be reversed is an open question. Diplomatic norms, once violated, are difficult to restore. Trust, once lost, requires sustained effort to rebuild. Allies who have been humiliated, remember. And the international system, having seen that American diplomatic commitments are subject to presidential whim, will adjust to a world where American promises are worth less. The dining room at Mar-a-Lago will be remembered historically not as a location for a meeting, but as a symbol of the moment. American diplomatic authority collapsed. Future historians will point to images of Zelensky standing in that room, maintaining composure while Trump praised Russia, as evidence of how quickly great powers can squander the legitimacy that took generations to build. Protocol matters. Diplomatic ritual matters. The location of meetings and the rank of airport greeters matter. They matter because they communicate relationships, establish hierarchies, and create the predictability that allows international cooperation. When protocol collapses, cooperation becomes harder, alliances weaken, and the international order becomes more chaotic. What happened at Mar-a-Lago wasn't just disrespectful to Zelensky personally. It was a signal that the United States no longer values the diplomatic architecture that made American global leadership possible. And once that architecture collapses, rebuilding it requires more than just changing presidential behavior. It requires restoring belief among international partners that American commitments mean something. That belief, once shattered, may not be recoverable within our lifetimes. The Mar-a-Lago dining room meeting may be remembered as the moment it became irreversible.